Welcome to Missing the Mark, where we look for meaning in strange places. I'm Christopher. Today I'm going to talk about why it is that I don't debate atheists on YouTube, or really anywhere for that matter. Now, before I get into it, I want to clarify this is only going to be about why I don't do it, why I operate this way. I'm not suggesting how anybody else should carry out on their YouTube channels or their life or anything. I'm only talking about why it is that I do the thing I do, and not attempting to proclaim any sort of universals whatever in terms of behavior. So before I get into it, if you've been in my comment sections, you'll notice that there's some angry atheists who show up and like to give inaccurate summaries of what I said. So to save them the time of watching this video, I'm going to give just a sort of brief executive summary for them. So the first reason is that I'm too scared. Atheists terrify me. And in point of fact, I actually wake up at night several times a night from nightmares, 5, 10, sometimes 10, 15 times a night, waking up, drenched in sweat, having this nightmare that I was debating an atheist. And he said to me, like, "Where's your evidence?" Or, "That's not evidence." Or, "Can you find that in a peer-reviewed scientific journal?" Or, "That wouldn't stand up in court." And I definitely have no answers for any of these things because I've never considered them before, nor in fact have I ever even heard of them before. They'd blow my mind if I did. My faith would be shattered, my life would be in shambles, and so I'm too terrified of that happening to ever be willing to debate an atheist. The second thing is that I'm too arrogant. I mean, I know everything, nobody has anything to teach me, so there's no point. And just to clarify, yes, this does in fact make me a bad Christian, because you can find right there in one of the emails from St. Peter where he said, if anyone challenges you to a public debate, you have to accept and carry on a public debate and dignify their position by doing so. And also, too, there's the, Jesus said, at one point, I'm having trouble remembering exactly where, but Jesus said that if anyone insults you, fly off the handle screaming ad hominem fallacy at them over and over again, so loud your face turns red until you pass out from hypoxia. But if they ever commit public blasphemy, treat that with as much respect as you can possibly muster, for there is nothing that needs to be treated more kindly, more delicately, and with more reverence and respect than public blasphemy. That is the essence of what I'm teaching. I don't remember. Is this Sermon on the Toilet or something? I can't quite remember. Anyway, so that's a basic summary of what you need to know. And, so go ahead, if you're that sort of angry atheist, and stop watching right now. I'm not going to say anything else that you can understand. Okay, so for the rest of us who are still here, I want to give one caveat before I delve into what I'm actually going to say, which is that I will happily answer questions from atheists. Any sort of atheist, really, even the angry kind. There's the big distinction here being that in a debate, you're trying to win. You're trying to, that is to say, convince somebody of something. You're trying to get a person to change their position, whether it's from being undecided to being decided or to flip their position or what have you. You're attempting to get somebody to change. In answering questions, somebody has a question, you give them the answer. If they don't like it, okay. So, if somebody asks me, what does transubstantiation mean? I can explain to them about how the substance remains the same while the accident, such as its physical form, changes. Person says, well, I don't believe that actually happens. Fine. Okay. Up to you. So that's the difference, and I'm willing to do the latter. I'm willing to give explanations, and that's the sort of actual sense of be willing, in St. Peter's letter, be willing to give, if anyone asks you, be ready to give an explanation for why you have hope in your heart. Somebody asks me why it is that, say politics doesn't depress me. I'm quite happy to tell them it's because God runs the world, not people. People can do things, and people can do some very bad things, but ultimately what, the evil that human beings can do is constrained by God's permission, and he will not let them do anything so bad that greater good can't be brought about because of it. So, I have faith in that, and, the news doesn't really bother me that much as a result. That's, explaining why you have hope in your heart. I'm not trying to prove to anybody else that this is the case. I'm not trying to say, stop worrying. Don't worry. I'm going to make you not worry. Go ahead. You don't believe that? You think, the very, essence of it being possible at all for there to be any sort of goodness or happiness in the world hangs in the balance, then go ahead and bite your nails and worry. It's your life. So that's sort of the distinction there. I'm willing to do the one, but I'm not willing to do the other. And why am I not willing to do the other than the obvious? If if you're older than about, I don't know, 20, you kind of are aware that it's really, really hard to get a person to ever flip their position on anything. In a long-term sense, you can talk people into things for short periods of time, but then when you're gone, they tend to revert back to how they had been. Okay, so why don't I engage in debate? Because I did a video about where debate is valuable, and so to some degree you can just kind of flip it, but I want to elaborate in particular with atheists. So the short answer to this is I've done it before. A lot. Just to give you the barest of my background that explains this, I'm closer to 40 than I am to 30, and not quite there, but close. And I've been thinking about atheism since I was a teenager, early teenager, roughly. Somewhere around 14, 15, I started doing Christian apologetics on the internet. And I did that for a while, and then I sort of took a break where I just, I only talk to people in real life, and I argue with people in real life. Just the sort of friends I tend to seek out, or people I can have conversations with, or arguments with. I love arguing by nature. Back before I got onto caffeine, I could go to 2 a.m. having arguments and seem wide awake. But having done it a lot, a tremendous amount, it's not that my appetite for argument got slated, but the thing is, I kind of exhausted all of the arguments, and especially when it comes to, when I say especially, I mean when it comes to atheistical stuff, there are tons of fascinating things in the world. I love meeting new people, and if they have different professions or different backgrounds or knowledge, if they're in a scientific field or something, and pumping them for information, about the things they know. And I'm always on the lookout for that, and that's still, going unabated in my life. But in this particular domain, with regard to atheism, I kind of saw it all, and then I saw it all again, and then I saw it all again, and over and over and over, I kept, it's just the same things over and over again, sometimes in different words. But if you, talk to people enough to find out what they mean, it's the same thing I had seen before, and the same thing I had seen before. And that kept happening so much, I started thinking about why. There are two sort of atheists that you need to distinguish here to explain why for both of them, because it's different reasons for the two. The first is what I will rather inaccurately call bullies, just for the sake of convenience. They're the people who make lots of assertions with great conviction, but no arguments. So, they like, come on, you believe that Bronze Age stuff? How stupid can you be? It's not an argument, it's not anything, but it has a great force of conviction. If they're in person, and they almost never are, but in any event, if they're in person, they're the sort of person who's, they pull their shoulders out broad and they stand up high and they get really in your face. And, and that body language conveys a great deal of conviction in text on the internet. Conviction gets conveyed in different ways, but the same basic thing. And, us being human, when you read it in text, you kind of mentally picture the body language too. I think most of us do. Those sorts of people, they don't make arguments. So there's kind of no point in arguing with them because, they've got a list of assertions and some great, very strong conviction about these assertions. So what? So, I mean, there's no point in talking to them because they literally offer nothing. There are smart atheists, by contrast, they're very different. And I've met a bunch of smart atheists, more in person than on the internet, oddly enough. And I think to some degree there's a self-selection factor. That you'll meet people in real life for any reason, and they may turn out to be atheist. On the internet, you'll tend to meet, because you see much narrower dimensions of people, you'll tend to meet atheists only because they're really into being an atheist on the internet. And that's not something that the smart atheists generally do. So there's just sort of a self-selection factor involved in that. But in any event, the smart atheists are much more interesting to talk to. They tend to know a lot more in general as well, sort of by virtue of that. They tend to have, more interest and a much greater depth of knowledge in other things, and can be quite good on other subjects. They tend to sort of have, loosely speaking, a blind spot when it comes to religion. And for reasons I'll actually talk about in a moment. But basically when it comes to them, there are some conversations you can have. And if you've never talked with atheists before, it's probably worthwhile to do. There are definitely things you can, sort of get, especially in a practical sense of knowledge, there are a lot of things you can learn by doing it. I've done it a lot with a lot of people over the years, and it got more and more similar over the years. I just recognized everything and never saw anything new. And especially as I got better at figuring out what people meant, asking clarifying questions. Do you mean this? Do you mean that? And then, once you get the clarifications, figuring out, okay, you're saying the same thing as this. And they'll say, well, yeah, basically. That last part's key, by the way. If you want to be sure that you actually understand somebody, restate their belief to them in some manner they will agree to, and then you can be pretty clear you actually understand it. You don't want to just leave it at, thinking you understand. To sort of show you what I mean about there isn't really much new. The two big arguments against the existence of God. The first one being the problem of pain. But you can find both of these in the Summa Theologica, as the objections that St. Thomas gave. You see them around as well. Not too surprisingly. C.S. Lewis called it the problem of pain. Peter Kreeft called it the problem of evil. Whatever, the problem of suffering, whatever exactly you want to call it. It's, the existence of suffering, or any sort of evil, especially, in the natural or moral sense, shows that God can exist, because if God was good and omnipotent, then there could be no evil. St. Thomas puts it more briefly, but I won't get into that. And so basically, I actually had, finally, after long conversations with a friend, I finally simplified it. And then I found the simplification apply. So here's the simplification. It's incredibly short. It was, it is logically possible that God permits pain in order to achieve greater good. Pain, evil, suffering, whatever you want. These are, they're all, philosophically speaking, they're all the same, basic concept. That these are permitted in order to achieve greater good. And I trust God. To which my friend then said, I don't. To which I said, I know. There you are. That's that argument entirely in a nutshell. Occasionally you'll find objections like, well, I know exactly how much suffering is in fact compatible with greater good, and it's not this, to which about the only possible response is laughter. Because it's like, okay, nice to meet you, God. But anyway, some minor things like that aside, that's the basic argument. That's the only thing that you can have. On the one hand, it's a person looks at the world and says, this doesn't look consistent with a great God. Like, it just does not, in a noetic sense, not a discursive sense. This doesn't look like a world that is run, that is ordered according to good. Versus somebody who looks out and says, this looks like a world that is ordered according to the good, that is, not going as well as it could be, but is still much better than, many possible alternatives. And that's just, it's our perception of the world. Okay, we have different perceptions of the world. You can't argue for one or the other. Because, to actually argue conclusively, this is definitely incompatible with a greater good, is to require knowledge a human being can't possibly have. We're far too limited. And on the flip side, you can see it, but you can't, you can't, because you can't analyze all possible worlds and so on, there's no way to prove the flip side either. This is just our best, our best understanding of what we perceive when we look out into the world. People have different judgment. Again, God, the other argument basically is God is superfluous. Amusingly enough, St. Thomas stated this like 80 years before Occam never stated it exactly this way. But it is superfluous to account for on more principles what can be accounted for by fewer, roughly. Loosely Occam's razor, that the world explains itself. The world explains itself. We don't need God. And well, the world doesn't explain itself very obviously. I mean, if you look at time, I think this is perhaps the clearest, which is kind of why St. Thomas said, I think, that this is most manifest in the argument for motion, motion perhaps being better translated as change. And I'm not going to get into the structure of the argument, but just very simply, this is the world very clearly does not explain itself. The things in the world very clearly do not explain themselves. But they are big enough, they're sufficient enough that you can look at them and not look past them if you want to. There's enough there to occupy your attention. And what I have found in general is that the atheists the intelligent atheists, who, in generally also not the angry ones, who are, tend to be swayed by this, for the most part, what I've seen, things especially of my friends, where they're people I actually have, time to get to know them and look at them and, look at their lives and so on, is that they focus very much on some particular things within creation, so much so that they never really stand back and look at creation together, because all of creation is an arrow pointing at God. But in the same way that you can, miss the forest for the trees, that is to say, you can stand there and look at one tree so much that you don't even notice you're in a forest, it's a matter of focus and what you look at. And there is, it is always possible for a person to say, like, I'm not going to look out there because we can't actually see the forest anyway, if there was one. I'm only going to pay attention to this tree because I can actually see that. Okay. All right, fine. I mean, if that's what you're doing, that's fine. It's not fine in the sense of being correct, but, you have free will. You can make that choice for yourself. And, if what you're saying is that you're making that choice, then you're making that choice. It's not quite phrased that way. Obviously, I'm using the Christian view of what's going on. But, I'm Christian, so that's what I'm going to do. I don't expect atheists to describe everything in the Christian view of things. I kind of expect them to describe everything in the atheist view of things. Not everyone in life agrees. It's kind of okay. It doesn't mean that everyone's right. It's okay in the sense of, like, we have to live with this anyhow. Otherwise, none of us would ever make it. Okay. So, that's, again, there we are. I've described basically the entirety of what there is to talk about in the God is superfluous argument, or observation, whatever, approach, whatever you want to call it, really. There's nothing more to say, and you can have, another 300 hours of conversation about this, and you will not get anything more about this, because it all resolves down to that basic thing of, I'm going to focus on creation, I'm not going to look at the whole thing, because whatever reason exactly, I don't believe we can, I don't believe it's worth it, I'm not interested, whatever. But that's it. You're never going to get anything else. It's structurally, that's all that there can be. And that's what I found for all of it. That structurally speaking, there's a little bit you can discuss. I mean, if you really know what you're talking about, it can take a few minutes and that's it. There's nothing structurally else permitted. Now, worse is that a great many atheists in the West are materialists. That is, it doesn't have a perfectly coherent definition, but there's nothing but matter and its interactions, or naturalists they're sometimes called. It's all derived from that idea that life is just a big 3D billiards game. Turns out it's not true. People still kind of believe it anyway, whatever. The point is, most Western atheists are materialists, some Eastern atheists as well. And the thing is, materialists deny that knowledge is possible. And they do this sort of for several reasons. Frankly, the easiest way to see it, I think, is that they deny that free will is possible because everything is just predetermined by the initial conditions of the universe. And intellect, mind in the real sense requires free will. They're not separable from each other. Distinguishable, but not separable. Having said that, that may not be as intelligible to everybody. And so a sort of simple example of where people go like this is scientism. The idea that science explains all knowledge and nothing that is not science is actually, knowledge and so on. You meet this all over the place. This is not all atheists. I'm just saying this is a good example by which you can see how materialists tend to go this way. But of course, the problem with scientism is that science itself does not ever come to conclusions. the nature of science, if you're, actually study the scientific method, is that you form hypotheses, pardon me, and you come up with possible tests, and then you test it, and then if it's disconfirmed, you get the problem of trying to figure out whether it was the experiment or the theory, but leaving that aside, you throw it out, or if it's not disconfirmed, then you hold on to it and try to come up with more tests. Nowhere at any point here do you actually come up with knowledge. That is to say, certainty. You've got things that you can think are probably true, or things that are useful, which is why a great deal of science is conflated with engineering, even though it's not properly the same thing. But nowhere in here is it possible to actually come to knowledge, and scientismists will say that this is the only route to knowledge. But since it can't lead to knowledge either, they are clearly disclaiming that knowledge is possible. All you can have are, essentially heuristics. Now, so if you're after knowledge, and, I actually am, then there is no point in talking to somebody who believes this, because he doesn't have any to give. Now, I am talking about, theoretical things, because, people who believe in human theories never believe them throughout their life. So by all means, if somebody is a rigorous well, no one's a strict materialist, but if somebody is a relatively convinced materialist, by all means talk to them about motorcycle repair or gardening or anything where they completely forget during that conversation that they're materialists, because then they'll be human and give you knowledge. But anywhere where they'll remember that they're materialists, it becomes absolutely pointless to talk with them. So as I said, there are other things. It's sort of forced by the nature of materialism in any event, that they can't believe in knowledge, and none of them do. Just a funny thing illustrating that is that on Twitter a number of times I made some remarks about how it's kind of weird how I can't find a single atheist who actually believes that reason works, and then I'd get especially if this got retweeted by anyone, I'd get some angry responses about, like, of course we believe in reason. And then I asked the question clearly, so you believe that human reason can come to true conclusions? Like, well, no. I mean, can't get truth, but, reason works. What does that mean? Well, and they explain some version of the scientific thing, but you can't actually come to truth. No, of course not. Right, okay, so you don't believe that reason works either. And that's the thing, universally. So, for people who don't believe that reason actually works, yes, they do something that looks a little bit similar. They are people, they, have to think. They can't avoid it, so they'll come up with something, but they come up with this broken thing where they disclaim the truth of everything that they conclude. And so, all people might possibly teach you something by accident, but it's much more valuable to spend your time with people who can teach you something on purpose. Okay. So, bringing this into debate, sort of, focusing, and crystallizing the point there, in the same way that there is no point in, talking with somebody, more generally, in order, who doesn't believe in knowledge because they can't really give you any, there is really no point in debating somebody who doesn't believe in knowledge, and especially who doesn't believe that reason works, for the very simple reason that you can't reason a man into something if he denies that reason is effective. You're not debating if all you're doing is shouting or, throwing rocks at somebody. So if you're talking, you have to be attempting to be reasonable. There's a reason why the ancient Greek word logos meant word, thought, rationality, argument, logic, etc. They're all connected. So there's no point in trying to reason with a man who disclaims that reason works. It's kind of just fundamentally silly. Now, this violates egalitarianism. And this may be a little bit more of an issue for Americans than for others. I'm not sure. We tend to have a sort of, even where we deny strict egalitarianism, we tend to, as a culture, like the idea of you treat everybody the same as much as you possibly can. And here's the thing. The atheist is not the same. There are things that a Hindu can teach me. There are things that a Jew can teach me. There are things that a Muslim can teach me. There are things that a practitioner of Shinto can teach me. Everybody who has some sort of religion, who affirms some sort of truth about the world, has something that he can teach me because he's got some truth that he affirms. But atheism is not a religion. Atheism does not affirm any truths. I understand people like to say that atheism is a religion, or, they use science as a religion because, just sort of pointing out that atheists are being hypocrites. And yeah, they are being hypocrites. But in fact, atheism is not a religion. It really is just a negation. It is this sort of blank emptiness that doesn't have anything to give. And the problem with atheism being a strict negation, with atheism not being a religion of any kind, is that it contains nothing. It is, roughly speaking, the religious empty set. And because of that, there's nothing to debate with an atheist. They don't have anything to bring. All they can do, inherently, is to say, well, true things don't work. Coming to knowledge doesn't work. And there's no point in debating somebody who can't bring anything positive to the table, because you might as well just debate, a rock. Better yet, a Teddy Ruxpin, that all it says is, I don't believe you. I don't believe you. I don't believe you. Because an atheist can't inherently say anything else. And yeah, this means you're going to treat him differently. But the problem is he's different. And so that's why. That's why at this point in my life, I don't debate atheists anymore. Because they inherently, structurally don't have anything to say that I haven't already heard. On the subject of this. On plenty of other subjects they do. But there's nothing really to debate there. In order to debate, you have to have positive things. Sort of blank nothing. Well, I already know that. I can do that myself. I can just say, but what if it isn't true? To everything I say. I can do that as easily as anybody else can. I don't need, another person sitting across the room to say that, because that's the only, thing they have to say. So it's, yeah, okay. And there is, they can bring up some specific, counterpoint to something else in terms of, if I'm making if I were making a historical claim, somebody could point out there's something about this historical claim that's inaccurate. But I have, in all my time, I've never actually seen that happen. It just, for whatever reason, I've never seen that sort of thing happen. Possibly because I happen to believe in things that are historically true. And you're not going to come up with good counter evidence to things that actually happened. But leaving that aside for the moment. So I will say, if I had some actually good reason to believe that some atheist actually had some strong historical evidence, I'm not the right person actually to go looking into that so much as I'd like to see people who are learned historians look into it and then evaluate, their take on it. Ultimately, though, that is the sort of thing I would be at least, willing to, if not debate formally, because that's pointless. It's certainly the sort of thing I'd be very much, interested in engaging. But, until I actually see something like that, and the problem is, I've seen lots of stuff that purports to be something like this that's utter garbage. All sorts of things about Yahweh's a Canaanite storm god. And you look into it for like 3 minutes, and it's nothing. It's complete garbage. And various things like this. Because I've looked into a bunch of this stuff already. In fact, if I ever hear any new claim, and it does happen once in a while that I hear some new historical claim from an atheist, I will do my best to check them out. And they sort of turn out to be like kind of laughable garbage pretty immediately. Again, largely I think is a self-selection function of where I'm, where I'm hanging out. On the internet, you're not going to come across, scholarly articles very often. So I'm not, trying to generalize that in total. But so, that sort of thing is very much something I'm, willing to check out. I'm not very interested in checking out, dumb claims on a meme. But, and the other problem actually is I'm not that interested in checking out books by people who are in the scholarly industry where they have to come up with new theories all the time. Part of the problem with the scholarly stuff is because people have to be writing new things, and because there isn't new history being made, one of the best ways of doing this is to come up with new ideas of how to do some, new interpretation of something that already exists. And so to some degree, I think the best way of dealing with that is filtered through the other people who then have to write articles about it and, wait to see how that stuff shakes out. Because it's, again, most of it's junk. Having spent some time looking into it and getting frustrated because I did, you come up with like, well, this looks different than that, or this doesn't have the right feel, or, You know, you know, just to give a super brief example, you know, arguing that the gospel has to be dated to here because Jesus mentioned the destruction of the temple. Because of course it'd be impossible for him to have known about it beforehand. I mean, that one's kind of boggles my mind, since if he was telling the truth and was in fact the unbegotten Son of God, he could have known by direct knowledge of knowing. It didn't have to be interpolated into the text later. But that one's even stranger because, you know, given the context of the Jews being occupied by Rome and so on, that wouldn't even be a particularly unlikely guess from a secular source, that before too long the Romans were going to say screw this and annihilate the Jews and the temple and so on. So I mean, that one's, you know, really weird, and all these things tend to turn out like that. That there's, you know, historians who have to, you know, publish something, so they do, and you look at it, it's junk. So I mean, no, by the way, I'm not trying to make a general statement about like historical critical analysis, of which, you know, can be very useful, and entirely Orthodox Christians make use of it. It's just it can also be used for the academic publishing industry that just needs to come out with new things. That's that problem that new history isn't being published. I'm sorry, isn't being produced. You know, new history is being produced only in the sense of the future is turning into the past, but, you know, there isn't new past around the time of Jesus being created. And yes, the occasional archaeological find, but hopefully you get what I mean. All right, so that's enough. Hopefully, from that sort of caveat, you can interpolate the other caveats I'm not going to bother to state to this. So that's why, ultimately, that's where I am right now and why I'm here. And as I said in the beginning, I'm not trying to talk anybody else into doing or not doing anything. Just explaining why it is I'm doing what it is I'm doing. So, until next time, may you hit everything you aim at.